Lucy Powell. Good morning to you, Lucy Powell. Do you have confidence that your counterpart would have fired him if he hadn't resigned?
Well, no, because he should have been fired weeks ago. I think this has been evident now for some time, and it's been clear that it's caused untold damage to the reputation of the BBC, that Richard Sharp has remained as chair during this time. And it was clear some weeks ago that he failed to disclose this cosy, sort of murky relationship with the then Prime Minister, who went on to appoint him at the same time he was helping facilitate this loan. And Rishi Sunak and the Conservative government should have sacked him weeks ago. But I'm afraid this is a pattern we're now seeing time and time again, that they are more interested in saving their mates in these jobs, whether it's Dominic Raab or Owen Paterson or now Richard Sharp, than they are in doing the right thing for the country. And that's why I don't have faith. But what I want to see now is some very clear leadership from the government, that they are going to put in place a truly independent and robust process to appoint his successor, so that we can never end up in this situation again and causing so much damage to the BBC through what has been a very important and difficult time for them.
What did you make of his resignation statement and the fact that the BBC board still seemed to support him?
I don't think he's understood the severity and the seriousness of this situation, and seeing this as some kind of technical breach. These rules around disclosure exist entirely for these eventualities, because you have to declare at the time you're applying for these jobs for any perceived or actual interest that may then, if they come to light, put the reputation of the BBC at risk. And his failure to disclose them, and then the fact that they did come to light, absolutely has done untold and possibly unrecoverable damage to the reputation of the BBC and the position of chair. And that's why he needed to go weeks ago. And he's misunderstood all of that. And he's clearly misunderstood that even today. But that's why Rishi Sunak should have sacked him before waiting for this report, a report which I instigated, not the government. I asked for this inquiry. That's why the report came to me first this morning. And it shouldn't have taken Labour and me to instigate it. The government should have acted. Rishi Sunak should have shown some leadership, sacked him weeks ago, and then put in place a robust process to appoint his successor and restore some faith and trust in the BBC.
There's a familiar pattern, isn't there, in the way that the narrative is being handled. We saw it last week with Dominic Raab, who'd clearly had advance sight of the KC report that was coming out and was able to control really what was being said about it. And that's exactly what we've seen with Richard Sharp. And with both of those resignations, it's avoided putting the Prime Minister in a difficult position.
Absolutely, we are now seeing a pattern of behaviour. The Prime Minister, it seems, unable to take on the vested interests of his friends and his close confidants, who he and his predecessors are appointing to these public appointment positions. It's kind of cronyism and sleaze at its worst. The Prime Minister has been unable to act in a way in which he should, which was that he was really the only one. He and the Culture Secretary were the only ones who had any power to hire or fire the BBC chair. Nobody else did. I called for this report to bring to light these issues and to make it clear that he had failed to disclose this relationship and disclose these arrangements, and he had, and he should have been sacked ages ago. And we've still not heard from the government or Rishi Sunak about that today. I'm sure we'll hear some warm, mealy words later today and put it all on Richard Sharp. But this is where leadership comes in, and this is where we need to see some proper leadership. And I want to see the government now leading and making sure that there is a truly independent and robust process to appoint a successor, so that we can't have these allegations of cronyism and sleaze damaging and tarnishing the BBC.
Lucy, however you look at it, the BBC chair is always a political appointment, isn't it? It's licence fee funded, and therefore the BBC chair has always had been really there at the appointment of the government of the day, whether it be Labour or Conservative?
Well, look, I think this is the balance that we have to try and get right. There has to be some kind of democratic oversight or accountability. That's why we do have the process of this select committee is supposed to, look into these appointments as well. But they too were kept in the dark about some of these details when they were scrutinising this appointment. We do have to have some democratic oversight to these positions, but we also have to ensure that the process that is arrived at is not only independent, but seen as being independent. There were some other criticisms about the process in this report. For example, that government ministers and advisors throughout the appointment of Richard Sharp made it very clear to the media and others who their preferred candidate was for this job, thereby clearing the field of anybody else who might have applied for this position. And the report today recommends that sort of behaviour stops. It makes some other recommendations as well about enhancing and strengthening this process. But I think the government should be going further on that, really, so that it can provide that reassurance to licence fee payers, to the vast majority of the British public, that this process is independent. We get the best person for the job. Yes, of course, the government of the day probably has to sign off that at the end of the process, but they shouldn't be going out to their very cosy network of mates to get one of them to apply, clearing the field of everybody else, and then rubber stamping them getting the job at the end. We've got to see an end to that process, and that's why I've set up an independent review panel to advise Labour so that how we can not do that ourselves.
But could you not say that actually the Prime Minister has potentially pulled a blinder here, because the situation, the controversy with Dominic Raab, the controversy with Richard Sharp could have been very uncomfortable for him indeed. They've both gone. He hasn't had to fire them. And now we're in a run-up into the local elections. We've got the coronation. The electorate's going to forget quite quickly, aren't they?
Well, I don't see it like that. I think that the job of Prime Minister is to show leadership, to sort these problems out before they get worse and worse. What we've seen over the last few weeks, when the BBC has been faced with some very difficult questions and some difficult issues, particularly over the Gary Lineker affair, is that we've had a BBC chair missing in action, a BBC chair who has himself, through his failure to disclose his interests, has brought reputational damage to the BBC during this time. The longer and longer that has gone on, the deeper and deeper that damage has been and is. And that's why he should have been sacked a long time ago. And I think that the public are now really starting to see a pattern of behaviour here, which is a Prime Minister hiding away, sitting on these reports, hiding behind investigations, which in this case I instigated, hiding behind them and waiting for people to fall on their sword rather than doing the right thing for the country and sacking these people and helping to move on.
Just a final question for you, which is related to all this. In the name of transparency and declaration of conflicts of interest, should Sue Gray say when she first started talking to the Labour Party and Sir Keir Starmer, and whether or not that was before or during her investigation into the goings-on at Number 10?
Well, that appointment is all subject to an independent process as well, where all of this information is laid bare and is made clear. But my understanding is absolutely that those conversations did not take place during that investigation. Absolutely not, because at the time, Keir Starmer had a chief of staff and there was no vacancy, and that vacancy only became open last autumn, and that's when Keir began the process of looking for a chief of staff. But we'll see the outcome of the ACOBA process there, which is absolutely right, and we've said we'll stand by that.
All right, Lucy Powell, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.